to know how you are, how your family is doing, and how you guys are, and how you all are dealing with this corona pandemic.
Okay, thank you for having me. We are just keeping in there. It's hard psychologically to stay at home for so long, and then we also think of all the other people who can't afford to stay at home. We know that this is a privilege that is accessible to very few. So we are also concerned and thinking about all the other Kenyans who don't have this option. But also sometimes citizenship makes us get out and try and help others who need help. So yeah, my husband and my son were out today to help with some giving supplies to people who need them. So we are surviving. Yeah, but it's difficult.
I can imagine it's all difficult. It's difficult for I think for everybody. I mean, just to start this conversation, you wrote a recent op-ed, and I'd like to start with this quote that you said in your piece. You said, "What is lacking in Kenya is not graduates; it is really education in its true interdisciplinary character." And this piece was in light of you talking about corona and education. Would you kindly elaborate on what you meant by this? So we don't need graduates. What we need is real education. What did you mean by this?
I'm starting to get frustrated, and maybe that's also the other thing I need to say about this time, that I'm getting so frustrated because all the intellectual problems behind the decisions that are being made today are education problems. The inability to read life in its multifaceted perspective. Everybody is in a tunnel vision, and especially the political class, they are only thinking of power. How do I maintain power? How do I look on top? How do I make government look good? So what was inspiring this post that I wrote was just feeling that we are not thinking in a multifaceted way. We are not thinking that health affects economics, is affected by environment, is affected by so many other things. And I started to trace that to education when we were having these conversations and somebody was telling me about their public health program. And when I started looking up the public health program, I was so surprised to find, there are so many things that are not mentioned in that program, and yet I know so many people are doing it and are getting scholarships to do this program. So soon we are going to have a healthcare system flooded with these bureaucrats, so to speak. And yet, as we can see from the pandemic, we haven't got the caliber of leadership that we need to think about healthcare as from a human perspective, let alone just the technical perspective. So when I was saying about interdisciplinariness, you see now the question comes, should we remove interdisciplinary degrees or interdisciplinary programs from the university? And I said, no, we shouldn't, but there clearly is a gap, and how do we fill that gap? So that's why I was saying, instead of having an interdisciplinary program where you control the interdisciplinariness, it's better to open up the university so that conversations can go on all the time without necessarily having it to be run from a degree program perspective. So that was where I was coming from. My frustration with the fact that thinking in Kenya is so simplistic, so solutionist, so tunnel visioned, and yet the education institutions which are supposed to facilitate complex thinking are also stuck in the same model. And they're stuck in the same model because they have relegated all interdisciplinary and life conversations to a degree program. But we have to have education outside the degree programs, not just within the classroom. Even within a university and a school, education must be happening outside degree programs. Yeah. So that's what I was saying.
Oh, okay. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Because when you mentioned previously that the current crop of leaders, the crisis is in education, you're also insinuating that we have a very subversive anti-intellectual culture here in Kenya, right?
Yeah.
But my question would be, what's the history of this anti-intellectual culture? Did it start 20 years ago, 30 years ago? What are some of the causal factors that have led us here?
Actually, in fact, that's a project that I'm doing right now, because I have been so perplexed by some of the challenges I have faced. And also, of course, I have been educated by fire because of my conversations with KICD. So I started to ask, why are we like this? Why are we unable to deal with complex ideas? And so I decided to go into the history books, and I read a book by Bruce Berman. I think it's called something about colonial control. I can't remember the title, but and people can just check it out. But what I found out was that the colonial bureaucracy that was brought here in I think the 1910s was very anti-intellectual. The bureaucrats who were being trained in the Oxbridge in the UK, they were not taught anything about Africa. Of course, there was no need, but they were basically taught there's no need for knowledge. There's no need to know anything about where the administrators were coming. All they needed to know is that the British Empire is so great and they are coming to spread its civilization here. That's all. And they were told that any knowledge about people, language, culture, science, anything is theory and is not practical. They don't need to know it. So they came here with that attitude that there's no need for knowledge. And unfortunately, because many of these colonial bureaucrats were from Oxbridge, there was a certain sense of elitism, that they were too good. They were representing this civilized empire, and they were bringing civilization here. So they come here with no knowledge of the terrain, no idea who we are, and they're just planted in the middle of villages. And when you have no background knowledge of anything, all you can do is use violence to implement what you've been told to implement. So the colonial officers had two principles. And the first one is ignore the problem until it becomes too big to ignore. And the second principle was a shot in time saves 9. Meaning, if you see something that is about to become problematic, use extreme violence at the beginning. Don't wait. Use extreme violence at the beginning and subdue people so that you can control the conversation. So this is what they did all over Kenya. You know, they either created problems and ignored them until they were too big to ignore, or, as we all know, they used extreme violence. So that culture was what was transmitted to the people who took over from the British in the 50s. When the Mau Mau rebellion broke out, the British government in London realized that maintaining Kenya as a colony was going to become too expensive and too politically problematic. So they started to prepare for independence. And so the Kenyan colonial bureaucracy was recruiting Africans to join the colonial government. So of course they only recruited those who were loyal to the government. So they recruited loyalists and they recruited home guards. The problem is, of course, also is that the people who had the education to be able to enter the system had to have been loyalists, because the missionaries were not allowing families from Mau Mau areas or certain areas to join school. So already you have a compliant group of Africans entering the system, and then not only are they compliant, but they are taught how to be more compliant. So by the time you come to independence, you have a whole bureaucratic system that is not interested in people, that is anti-intellectual, and that is violent. And so that culture is what has been replicated in the schools, in the media, everywhere. People don't want to listen to ideas. People want to shut down any conversation that is not the official order line. And that is now what we are harvesting with the police brutality, when at the time of the pandemic, we are dealing with a bureaucracy that can't deal with complex ideas. And a pandemic is a complex problem. It's a problem of economy, environment, food and agriculture, illness, personnel, all those problems. And we have a bureaucracy that can't think like that.
Interesting. So speaking about pandemics, since the pandemic broke, government has said that we need to close schools, churches, etc. But something interesting is that now there's been the last couple of weeks, rather, there's been parents are now homeschooling their kids, right? And but two strands in particular interest me here. One is a strand about the place for homeschooling as an alternative for proper education, and two, the space for tech and learning. I know you've spoken about this, but would you kindly elaborate further on these two particular strands that have really come in the last couple of weeks?
I really hate that homeschooling story. I hate it because the media is misleading the public. Homeschooling is not taking school curriculum home and learning it at home. And it definitely isn't the same as using online materials. Homeschooling is not about school curriculum at home. Homeschooling is a system where parents decide that they're going to be the ones administering the curriculum themselves from the house. So you can't call that homeschooling, but I think the reason this word is coming up is so as to give ordinary Kenyans who would not ordinarily afford homeschooling, it's giving them the impression wamepanda cheo, now they're in the league of the homeschoolers. But that's not what homeschooling is. Homeschooling is when a parent guides the curriculum, the administering of curriculum content to a child. So it is not the same as going home and doing the homework from the government curriculum. And the other insidious thing about this term homeschooling is the values that come with it. And I think that's what I find so troubling. The first one is an economic one. Ever since the current president, when he was the finance and education minister in 2010, he has always wanted to reduce the budget for teachers. Teachers are always a problem for him, I guess, partly because there are many and they're educated. And so when they go on strike, it's a political problem. And the way to deal with this political problem is to reduce the reliance on teachers. So there has always been a fantasy that we can do without human teachers in the classroom if we put everything online. And then when he became president in 2013, that was the first thing he did with the laptop per child. And even then there was the fantasy, which was talked about in media circles, of us not needing human teachers anymore because there are laptops. And so really what this is about when the government is pushing for homeschooling, it's really about removing teachers from the classroom so that money you do not have to pay salaries. And of course, there's nothing capitalism hates as much as seeing money going to people. So they always look at the budget for teacher salaries and they think to themselves, this is such a waste of money. It's such a waste of money to pay allowances. It's such a waste of money to pay pension to teachers. So they want to remove that budget line, and the fantasy that they have is that they can do that through homeschooling. So that's why you're finding that the media is talking about homeschooling when what is being offered is not really homeschooling. And then on the cultural front, homeschooling is an agenda that came from the United States. And I've not yet found out exactly, the historical currents, but I've seen two suggestions. One is that the homeschooling movement grew after the desegregation of schools. So in some states in the US, whites could withdraw their kids from school and offer homeschooling instead of having their children attend school with black kids. The other one, of course, is now when you come to the Reagan era, the Reagan and Thatcher era, where they want to withdraw social cushions for the poor. And these are the poor who have been victims of economic inequality since slavery. So to remove those cushions, then you start to badmouth the family, the black family, and say the problem with black people is that they don't know how to have good families. So homeschooling is sort of comforting that imperial idea of the nuclear family as the replacement for society. Because once you say that the only people who deserve a social status are the ones who are born in a family with one man, one woman, 5 kids, a dog, and I don't know, whatever else, and a four-wheel drive. It's an agenda of deciding who is worthy and who is not. And since colonial times, we have been told that the real families are the families that follow this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 model. One wife, two kids, 3 bedrooms, a four-wheel drive. I can't remember what number 5 is, but it's a capitalist family model that is pushed by the church, and now homeschooling is there to sort of reinforce that idea that the only families that matter are heterosexual, monogamous families. Yeah, middle class, heterosexual, Christian, monogamous families. Yeah. So homeschooling is such an insidious agenda, and yeah, that's what troubles me when I see people mentioning it so carelessly in the media. Yeah.
And what about the conversation around tech and learning? Because now we all particularly the middle classes and the upper classes are all stuck in their homes. So there's been conversation about tech and learning, that this is now the new frontier of learning. Just say something about that.
There's no new frontier of learning. Tech is like a car. A car is technology. So I don't know why people are getting so excited about being able to learn things on the internet. There's no difference. But again, there are several agendas. Of course, one is, like I said, removing teachers from the classroom. You don't have to pay them because you can put everyone on the internet. The second one, of course, is that the tech companies stand to make a lot of money if everybody is forced to buy technology because it's required for education. But I think the larger narrative, I don't know whether I'll be able to explain it really well, but the larger narrative behind this idolization of technology is the idea of progress. That progress is linear, that people of the previous era were more backward than us, which is not necessarily true. And so there's this idea of, if we have technology, because this is technology that is new, we are necessarily better. So part of what the middle class in Kenya loves about technology is that feeling of, I am ahead, I'm with it, I'm posh, I'm in the latest, I'm in the know. So that's what is so seductive about technology, but technology doesn't change the learning outcomes. And in fact, actually, technology it entrenches inequality, because the people who learn from technology and learn well are people who already had a background of face-to-face classroom experience. So you can't say that somebody who has never had a good schooling, good arts education, you put them in front of a computer and it works. It doesn't work. And so that's why, in a sense, I think the middle class like technology because it affirms their social status. But that's not fair to the many poor people who don't already have the kind of access to knowledge and education and resources that the middle class has. And I hope Kenyans listening to me are not going to tag me again on that silly line about, are there radios in Mashinani, are there TVs? Because that's not the point. The point isn't whether people have radios and TVs and internet. The point is, what social background do they come from? Are they people who interact with technology a lot? Are their parents educated? Because actually, it also depends a lot on whether your parents are educated or not. That will affect the outcome of education. So it's not about whether people can get laptops or radios or internet. Even if you give them balloons, like the president was saying, the inequalities already in their surroundings will not make technology any better. It will not improve the learning outcomes of the children. And let me just say the last thing. There's an article I shared the other day where this guy was arguing that the rich, the super rich, the people who make money from these technologies, they don't even teach their children with technologies, because they realize every child needs a human guide to guide them through the learning, whatever they are learning. So then they hire teachers, they have small classroom sizes. Steve Jobs even said once that he doesn't allow his children to use tablets. So, we need to stop idolizing technology. Technology is an amplifier. That's what this guy said. I can't remember his name, but it's an amplifier. Whatever people are going through without technology is simply amplified by the technology. So if you're poor and you're not getting a good education, and even if you get technology, it will just amplify your poverty. So we need a good education with good teachers and good facilities, and technology cannot replace that need.
Okay, so I'd like to ask now a philosophical question, because tech, you're arguing that tech is not the solution, homeschooling is not the solution. You've argued before that CBC is not the solution. So my question is, what is education, and what is learning?
I think now that I have been talking so much about education, I would basically say education is society coming together to contemplate or to think about the challenges they are facing in their environment. So I have mentioned many things, the collective, that we all have to come together, and that we are facing our environment, that we are thinking together about what the challenges we have. I think those are the two ingredients of education, meaning that learning is a community process. You can't learn the way the techies are telling us. You can't just learn on your own by reading things. You have to be in conversation with people. Even when you look at us who talk on Twitter or Facebook, we are learning from each other. I've learned a lot from other Kenyans because of their interactions with me on social media. When they ask me questions, when they insult me also, when they give me additional information, you see, I'm learning, and I'm learning because I'm in interaction with others. I think that's what we need. We need interaction and a space to reflect. That is what we don't have in the school system. The school system has become this industry of violence where you cannot think, you cannot create, you're beaten, and if you ask questions, you're told, wewe ni mjuaji. There's so many obstacles to individual or collective creativity. So that is what is not in the schooling system. What else did I say? The collectiveness. We need to involve society more in how we educate. And this cannot be done by KICD writing it in a curriculum, like parental involvement. It has to be in the structure of the school system. You have to have more parents participating in the school system. You have to have also other places for people to learn, like I suggested in the interview I did with the elephant some years back. I suggested that we need, for example, community libraries, community computer labs, where people can come together and get information and learn and connect to people in other counties. So maybe people in Kwale County would call people in Narok County to ask about a certain thing. And, you know, that's what, if we want to idolize technology, that's what it should be doing. It's not just putting gadgets in front of children. And then we need more arts. We need art festivals, theaters, spaces for artists to perform, which we don't have enough of. We need museums where people can bring together their artifacts to show the next generation what life was like a long time ago. So there has to be an all-round commitment of society to knowledge production, and people coming together. You know, I know I'm saying this during the pandemic, but there has to be a commitment to people coming together, people creating and sharing knowledge outside, both in the school system and outside the school system. But what has happened in Kenya is that all other avenues for learning have been shut down by government, by church, by business sector. And I've started writing a series on this. Like, for example, apart from the school being so violent and so regulated, you have censorship from for example, Ezekiel Mutua. You have corporates talking so badly about the arts. You know, everywhere you go, somebody is telling you not to think. That's Kenya, and that's the anti-intellectual culture.
Okay.
I was talking about. Anywhere you go in Kenya, you're always being told, don't say that, don't think that, stick to the script. So whatever failures are in society will definitely be failures in the school system. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Wandia. So my last question, which is actually tied to some of the things you already said, is that I mean, look, barring that Africa is not homogeneous, that we are varied societies, but there's a particular history that Africa shared, you know, coming from slavery to colonialism to neocolonialism. If Dr. Wandia Njoya was to be asked, what is a pedagogy of hope for educating the Negro, quote unquote, what would be those pillars? How would that look like for Dr. Wandia Njoya?
I mean, like I said, just more learning opportunities outside the school system, and also changing the culture within the school system. Like my recent post on interdisciplinary degrees, I was saying there should be a culture, not just a classroom experience, but a culture of sharing ideas and talking across the disciplines. These days, universities, the faculty never talk to each other unless maybe you come from the same tribe or you're doing a project together, but there's no spontaneous interaction or discussions about things that are affecting us. And so we need to cultivate those cultures in the universities of having talks and debates where the public can come if they want to come and listen to what we are doing, and where students are also coming, and they're coming from different departments to come and talk about a major issue. So there has to be a culture of inquiry and creativity and curiosity, which we don't have. So even when you see people like the governor, Dr. Mutua, saying, where are the inventions? How can we have inventions when we are not allowed to create anything? You know, to create is to ask for trouble from somebody. Somebody will come from somewhere and be there to make sure that you don't progress in your idea. So the society I would like to see. I would like to see museums and public libraries in every county so that people can learn without needing to meet a teacher, and they can form their own learning groups. I would like to see a culture, a Kenya where the arts are respected. We remove the tax on books, for example. You know, having more awards for people who are writing, painting, dancing, singing, all these things. We should have a culture of promoting the arts, because the arts are not just about the tangible product. It's about saying to society, you have the permission to think and to go beyond your current reality. So that's what I would like to see: more learning opportunities in the wider society, learning institutions that are not so narrow-minded and rigid, and then just, you know, a joy of fellowship and us being creative, all of us together, as we come to think about our common problems together. And then, of course, this is also an environmental issue. We need more green spaces, because people can't think when they're locked between stone or mud walls. So we need more green spaces, more places to walk. We need to be allowed to cycle and not have to always be in matatus, sitting in matatus for 3 hours to cover a very short distance. You know, all these things require somebody, leadership that thinks of humanity. What does it mean to be a human being and to be, you know, to be friendly and social with one another? And that's what education is, actually, because education keeps renewing itself. You can't have just one system or put another system or another system. You just have to be willing for society to have conversations without the government running everything. And if you go back now to to the first question, unfortunately, that's the kind of government we have that has been trained to just control, not to create, not to facilitate, but to control. But I hope that we will move towards a society that is more free to think and to create, so that our children don't have to be tied to just certificates and exams.
Wandia Njoya, I like that ending. Education that develops humanity. That's it for me. Thanks for being on this.
Okay.
On this Zoom experiment of alternative media.
Yeah, it's important. We need to do this.
Try to stay safe and pass my regards to the family.
Okay, I will.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.